My parents just moved to a new house, and they have a lot of books. And they have a nice 24-foot, mostly clear wall in their finished basement. So we thought we'd build a bookcase to go along that wall. Now, normally when you build a bookcase, you build a box and you put shelves in it. And then if you want to make it bigger, you basically build more boxes and fill those with shelves. But what happens when you do that is between each box, you end up with 2 layers of wood, or in this case, plywood. Because we were going to make so many shelves, I wanted to figure out a way to not double up the plywood between the seam between each box. The thought I came up with was to build the vertical section between each set of shelves and not build the box that goes around the shelves. So I would shift the modular of the bookcases. And what this would give us would be a single sheet of plywood between each set of shelves. I figured out that this was going to take us 9 sheets of plywood to do 5 shelves high at 24 feet wide with 12 bays of shelves. I got pre-finished birch plywood, as this would make the process at the end go a lot quicker because we wouldn't have to finish the bookshelves. And I carried everything into the shop, which isn't too bad. But I did put the sheets down in a place where they could start the process easier and not stick them over in a corner somewhere where they then have to get moved again to get going on the shelves. Every piece of wood in the shelves is going to be 10 3/4 inches wide. So both the shelves and then the vertical sections and the top and the bottom will be that width. So what I needed to do is just cut all the sheets to that width. So it was a lot of cutting strips. And because it's a little bit less than a foot, I ended up with a little bit of scrap on each sheet, which I'll use later for the base. The first part to make are the vertical sections, as we're going to drill holes for the adjustable shelf pegs to go in. Now, as my mom had been pestering me about getting these shelves done, I had her drill all the holes. And there was just a little bit less than 1,000. It was like 900 and something holes that needed to be drilled for all of the shelf pegs. So I showed her how to use the drill press and how to follow a pattern. And she did a really great job drilling all the holes.
All right.
This one at the bottom.
How deep do you make them, and how are we going to make sure they're absolutely even?
This way they need to be accurate. This way it doesn't matter so much. If we made a stick with holes in it that you could use as a template.
And then just mark it off. That would be easier.
Either mark it or use it to drill right through. But I don't want to use one of these. I was thinking to use one of these as a template, but then that template's going to get, the holes are going to get bigger and bigger. And
well, do you have something else this long?
Yeah.
Maybe a narrow thing?
So we made a template for the holes, and then she could clamp that to each piece and then just bring the drill bit down into each hole along the template and drill all of the holes that needed to be drilled. And it worked really well. We didn't screw up any of them. It took her 2 days to drill all the holes, and it really helped with the project. So as she did that, I cut pieces of maple to make an edge band for the front face of the plywood pieces so that we could cover up the cut edge of the plywood with a little strip of maple. And I made a really thin push stick to make those really thin strips. I just glued them on and then used a pin nailer to hold them in place while the glue dried. And those went pretty fast. It's sort of good to do the edging first before I start really cutting, so that as I cut the pieces, I'm cutting both the plywood and the edge to length so that I don't have to try and fit the edge later to the length of the plywood once it's cut. Then the next thing to do was the top and bottom pieces, and they're going to be approximately 2 feet wide, which will then make each shelf bay 2 feet wide, minus the width of the plywood. So I set up a fence on the radial arm saw, which would act as a zero clearance fence so that I wouldn't get any blowout on the back of a dado that I wanted to put in the center of each of the top and bottom pieces. Which, like I've said before, it's not so much for strength, but it would help the vertical piece to land right in the center. Or not so much right in the center, but exactly in the same place on each top and bottom piece. So that my bays on the shelves would all be exactly the same width. So that the shelves would all be interchangeable. And the top of the entire assembly I wanted to attach with pocket screws so that the top would be held together as one piece, holding all the vertical pieces together. And then I could put the top and bottom on, and it was just some glue and then some brad nails, and I added 2 screws as well. So I made these eye-shaped pieces. That would be the structure for the bookshelves. I sanded the front edge. Then, before those could go in place, I had to make a base for all of this to sit on. So I used the little leftover piece from the plywood to make the base. And it's basically 2 long strips with dados cut in them and then some shorter pieces to hold those together. So it's sort of making a ladder. But it makes a frame that then the bookcases can sit on. And it's going in a daylit basement, I guess you'd call it. So there's a door to the outside at the floor level. So if it ever floods, it shouldn't flood more than a few inches. So it'll be nice to have all the books up off the floor just a little bit. Then we can bring the base in. I made the first 2 at 8 feet, and we could lay those out. And then from there, I could make the third one once I knew what length to make that at, based on how they sat in the basement. And then the vertical structure could come in. And I installed that. So I did the pocket screws on the top, and I screwed the bottom down to the base. And I used pocket screws along the top and the bottom to screw the structure into the studs of the wall. So the thought is that if this ever had to get taken apart, I could do that without having to demo it. I could just undo all the screws. Then once I had all of the middle sections done, I could do the 2 ends. And the vertical pieces, because of one heating vent and a couple of outlets and switches, there was really one specific spot where it all fit and worked. So that the 2 ends kind of took up the difference. So I had to install the center, then make the 2 ends to a custom length. Because the inner vertical pieces will be supported by the shelves, the end one doesn't have that because it only has shelves on one side. So I wanted to add a piece that would help stiffen that end. And what that ended up being, I realized, is I could make that into a little shelf for smaller things. It's not just a piece of structure stuck on the end. It's actually 2 beams running vertically with shelves in between. Then it was time to make all the shelves. And they all went in. And it was time to start putting things on the shelves. And first went on the knickknacks. And then the books went on. And it actually ended up looking a lot better than I thought it was going to. It looks like a library. So it should be really useful. And my parents really seem to like it. So that's good. Thanks for watching.